Edgbaston, day 4. This is Ask George. George, first question comes from Daniel Chapman. Should all Ashes tests be held at Edgbaston?
Well, no, because the variety is lovely, isn't it? I think of all those games we'd have missed out on in Leeds and the Oval and everywhere else. So, no, but I know what you mean. It's a great atmosphere, it really is.
It's quite tense at times today.
Yeah, well, it's swung. Actually, I've thought that Australia had their noses in front quite often, and I still do, just about. But it has ebbed and flowed a little bit, yeah.
Wynne asks, should everyone except Ben Stokes play Bazball?
Oh, I don't know. We're all sort of accepting that this term exists and is, and that everything has to be wholehearted and fifth gear all the time. He batted better today, which I think is the point you're making, because he played in a more traditional manner. I think we're both going to write things today about the same sort of incident with a different point of view. I think Sam's going to write, has written, because he's quicker than me, a piece saying that, if you admire Joe Root ramping for 6 at the start of the day, you can't really complain when it goes wrong. And I'm going to say, yeah, you can.
Which is great. And then people can pick a side.
The thing is that it's very difficult to get wickets on this pitch. And yet Australia got quite a few quite quickly. And you look at the shot, for example, that Joe Root was out to, and, it was a high-risk shot. And the issue is they're playing high-risk cricket, and they'll get away with it sometimes because they're very, very good. But even Lewis Hamilton slows down for corners, eh?
Dave Studland asks, is the route for Ben Stokes back into the team at the expense of Ollie Pope?
It's not a ridiculous suggestion. Ollie Pope is spoken about at the moment as if he's a mythical creature who can't be dropped, and he's very, very good and very talented, and they definitely won't want to drop him because they've spent ages building him up and building the confidence to go and play the way they want him to play, and to drop him would undermine that to a large degree, so I get that. But I think a compelling case has been made for the inclusion of the best possible keeper, and you have to find a way for that to happen. And so Pope is one option. He's one of several, though.
He's also the vice-captain now, the permanent vice-captain. Does that hold any sway?
I mean, it probably does a bit at a time when the actual captain is, struggling with his fitness. But I think that Steve Smith captained Australia recently and might well captain, and he's not the designated Australian vice-captain. You don't want to be rule-bound about these things, but I should be frank with you. I don't think there's a cat in hell's chance that Ben Stokes is going to be recalled before at least the third test. I don't think they're going to change the squad ahead of Lords in that way anyway.
David Thomas asks, if England lose, will they have been beaten by Australia or by their own hubris?
I mean, it'd be a bit graceless, I think, to say it was just their own hubris. I mean, Australia, whatever happens in this game, Usman Khawaja has played a fantastic a series of innings. So, it would be a bit of a combination of those things. I mean, if they lose and Australia are 8 wickets down or something, you'll look back at the first innings declaration and it won't look terrific. Equally, though, you'll look back on some of the drop chances, and that's not hubris, that's just error.
Similar theme, JB asks, do England need to read the situation better rather than just playing a poor shot and saying, that's Bazball?
Yes, I think so.
I don't.
Yeah, I mean, surely, though, you've got to have a more sophisticated approach than just, whatever sport you're talking about, which the very best boxers don't just go out there and punch. They don't. They just don't. The best drivers don't just go out there and drive as fast as they can. They don't. I think there has to be a slightly more sophisticated approach. I do, yeah, I'm sorry. But
you don't need to apologise.
Well, I feel I do, because I do feel there's almost a cult developing around this style of cricket. I do. And it's almost like, if you don't wholeheartedly get behind it, you don't... Do you know what? Entertainment for me isn't just smashing 4s and 6s. Mike Atherton's epic 185, that was entertaining, wasn't it?
Actually, I make this point within the article that you've talked about, is that it's fine to not like this style of cricket in its entirety. I'm saying if you're really getting into it, then you have to accept that part of it is the high risk, high reward part of it.
I don't even know. I think you can admire and respect the boundaries that are being pushed all the time, and the huge skill and bravado of Root scooping in the first overs of the day. Of course, and you admire the declarations, which were marvellous in Mount Maunganui and Rawalpindi and stuff. They were brilliant moments, and still think, let's not try and be too clever with the game, yeah? I don't think there's a conflict between those two things. There's not a conflict between admiring hugely a captain who's inventive and wants to take the game forward, and also saying, well, that's brilliant, but I don't see the conflict there. There's clearly something special happening here. But, I'll say again, I liked the 2009 rear guard. Was that 2009 in Cardiff? Or, and you can think of many examples of that. And do you know what I really like? Beating Australia.
Again, on the same theme, there's a lot of questions on this theme today. SAHIL MITAL asks, that early declaration on day one has got a sting a bit now. I think this question came before those late 2 wickets, but maybe still relevant.
Yeah, but none of these decisions are absolutely right or wrong. They're just decisions, and you kind of make them right or wrong. And any sort of retrofitting of opinions here is a bit meaningless. All I would say is that the declaration in Mount Maunganui came terribly early, but it did come when the lights were just being turned on and atmospheric conditions were changing. Here it happened in fantastic daylight, and they only got 4 overs in, and Joe Root was batting. So was that smart? I don't know. And also, 2 tests ago they declared in Wellington when Joe Root was batting and they lost. So let's learn some lessons as well.
Matt Hallett asks, of the chances Johnny Bairstow's missed over the 2 innings,
3 takes.
It's going to be 4 now. How many are down to rustiness versus ability versus just bad luck?
Hey, that's a really, really thoughtful question, and obviously there's no sensible answer. I think what you would say is that a keeper like Ben Stokes will take more of those chances more often, and I think that's a fair answer. A lot of England's cricket looks a little bit rusty, and Johnny's keeping reminds me of how it was 10 years ago, or whatever it was, 8 years ago, and he improved, but he hasn't done it for quite a long time, and there have been mistakes. He was out of position again today, and I think it's obviously been very costly.
Danny asks, is it weird that saliva isn't allowed on the ball due to the risk of infection, but someone with an open wound on their hand isn't allowed to use a plaster?
I mean, it's a really good point and what I hadn't thought of, but you understand why they're not allowed to use a plaster. You can't enable someone to use the plaster to prevent the pain, and it's an artificial substance on the ball, I guess. But yeah, you make a point. I suppose as long as they're not putting saliva and fingers back into their mouth, there's not a great danger. But the more you think about it, the more it's quite grim, isn't it?
Matt asks, at what point will the 40 or 50 runs that Stokes and the England Brains Trust left on the field by declaring prematurely come back to haunt them?
I think we've answered that. I mean, I don't know. But, had it worked, and look, I wouldn't have done it, but had it worked, had he taken a wicket or 2 that evening, people would have been saying that's brilliant. I don't know, some of these things, bringing Harry Brook on, it looks a bit cute, doesn't it? But he did get Kane Williamson out in Wellington, so unless you try things, you'll never know. And to be fair to Ben Stokes, he's tried a lot, and a lot's come off in the last year or so. It's
very tough to be answering these questions as well when there's still 170 to get with 7 wickets. It's impossible to predict what's going to happen next, huh?
Yeah, it's impossible to predict, but also I wouldn't want to retrofit anyway. As I say, a lot of decisions in life aren't right or wrong. They're reasonable decisions that you may or may not agree with, but he's always going to take a punt.
Last one. Lord ENZONI, very, very bold, asks,
Your Lordship,
will Stokes and McCullum ever admit when they make a wrong call? Seems a bit tough, this one.
Well, it's really interesting because I wondered, after that edge in the first over of Australia's second innings, whether that would be the moment that they would admit they got it wrong with dropping Ben Stokes. And I thought to myself, no, they won't admit that. So, I don't get the impression they're unreasonable guys with, huge egos or anything like that. I just think they're committed to a style that they play. And you wouldn't want to go back to a stage where selection was really fickle. So although, I would pick Ben Stokes in a heartbeat, I get that you don't want to have a team where people are looking over their shoulders all the time, worried about the fickle nature of the management. Does that make sense? So I don't think they're going to change things immediately, but on a level they will be learning from it. And I thought you probably saw some learning from Ben Stokes with his batting in the second innings, where I think he was 3 from 21 balls or something like that, and he played himself in, gave himself time, and actually was out to a decent bit of bowling, and that can happen, can't it? So I thought you saw some learning there, didn't you?
Well, you can read all of George's stuff from day 4 at Edgbaston on thecricketer.com, and we'll be back tomorrow for the denouement. That's a big word.